Welcome to Tuesday Talks, your moment to pause, reflect, and dig deeper. Behind every headline is a bigger story.
Well, all eyes are on the conflict between Israel and Iran. It's really escalating.
Yeah, it's intense. We're seeing these reports, civilian casualties, the drone attacks, rocket salvos. It's a really dangerous moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's this other angle, maybe a bit surprising in the headlines, and that's the role Russia is playing. It's, well, complicated.
That's right. And that's exactly what we want to unpack in this deep dive. How is Russia navigating this? It's not just, what they say publicly.
Right.
It's about their strategic ties, their economic thinking, and also how this all connects back to other global events like the war in Ukraine. Big ripple effects.
So for this, we've looked at recent analysis from places like the Moscow Times, CNN, Firstpost, trying to get a few different perspectives on Russia's motives and actions.
Okay, let's dive in.
So where we start? Russia seems to be walking this really fine line.
It's a fascinating position, isn't it? They're pretty unique in maintaining active relationships with both Israel and Iran.
Mm.
I mean, their foreign ministry actually told Russian citizens to leave both countries recently. That says a lot about how volatile they think it is.
It really does. And with Iran, there's this strategic partnership. They signed back in April 2025. What's the real story there? How deep does it go?
That's a key point. Russia's deputy foreign minister, Andrei Rudenko, was very specific about this. He said it's explicitly not a military alliance.
Okay.
No mutual military assistance. It's framed more around, dealing with shared threats together. So, yes, the relationship is deepening, but it's not quite the military pact, some might think.
But more coordination, less obligation.
Exactly. It suggests they want alignment, but maybe not binding military commitments right now.
Interesting. And yet, even with this closer Iran relationship, Putin himself offered to mediate, right? In a call with Netanyahu.
He did, which naturally raises questions about whether they can effectively mediate. Hana Nate, an expert in this area, she's pretty skeptical. She thinks the Middle East right now is just too intense and unpredictable for Moscow to really control or steer things.
But it's chaotic.
And Ruslan Selimanov adds another layer. He argues Russia's credibility took a hit when they didn't fully back Assad in Syria earlier on. It made Putin seem no longer reliable in the eyes of some regional players.
So the offer is there, but the success isn't guaranteed.
Not by a long shot.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still in partnerships to the drones. That's been huge in the Ukraine context, the whole Russia-Iran drone connection. Is Russia still heavily dependent on Iran for Shaheds?
Well, they certainly were for the first 2 years of the invasion. That was the narrative, and it was largely true.
Yeah.
But Nicole Grzeski's analysis points to a pretty major shift. Russia can now apparently produce up to 2,700 Shahed drones domestically each month.
Wow, 2,700. That's a huge number.
It really is. It means they've drastically cut the reliance on Iran for these specific weapons. They're building up their own capacity.
Okay, that changes things. Although, I think I saw CNN point out that if Ukraine keeps hitting those Russian drone factories,
right,
then maybe that original Iranian supply could become important again down the line. It's not static.
Good point. It's definitely dynamic. But this drone aspect, it's just one piece of the puzzle, isn't it? Because even with this Iran partnership and Russia criticizing Israeli strikes, their relationship with Israel seems, surprisingly steady. How does that work?
Yeah, how do they square that circle?
That's the core of the tightrope walk, really. Ruslan Selimanov argues this current crisis is unlikely to affect Russia's relationship with Israel.
Despite everything.
Apparently so. And Mariana Belenkaya backs this up. She points out that relations stayed stable even when Russia got closer to Hamas. And she specifically notes, quote, Israel did not break off relations with Russia, did not impose sanctions on Russia after the Ukraine invasion started.
So pragmatism behind the scenes.
Yeah. It seems like it. Practical cooperation continues, whatever the public statements or other alliances might be. Belenkaya also adds, interestingly, that she thinks Russia is not particularly concerned about Iran's nuclear program.
That is telling about their priorities.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the diplomacy is complex, what about the economics? This feels like a potentially huge factor for Russia.
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets really interesting from Moscow's perspective. Could this conflict actually be an economic win for them?
A windfall, even.
Potentially, yeah. Especially if it disrupts energy markets. We saw it immediately. Brent oil jumped almost 10% that first Monday, went from like $67 to over $73 a barrel.
Just like that.
Just like that. Now, Iran produces quite a bit of oil, around 4 million barrels a day last year, exporting about 1.5 million a day this year. That's, what, maybe 3.6% of global volume?
Okay.
So the thinking is, if Israeli strikes hit Iranian energy infrastructure and limit that supply, well, prices could go higher.
And that directly benefits Russia's budget, right?
Especially now. Exactly. More revenue from their own oil exports just when they really need it.
And could Russia then, step in to fill the gap if Iranian oil is disrupted, especially for buyers like China?
That's precisely the idea. Igor Yushkov, a Russian energy analyst, made that point. If Iranian shipments drop, China might look more to Russian oil.
Which would be perfect timing for Moscow.
Incredibly timely, yeah, because their oil and gas revenues have actually been shrinking lately. And there's another angle, too.
Oh.
A long conflict makes any new deal on the Iranian nuclear program less likely.
Delay is everything.
And if that deal happened, the energy embargo on Tehran could lift. Iran could start selling oil and gas to Europe again.
Competition for Russia.
Direct competition. So delaying that scenario is definitely something Moscow wouldn't mind seeing. It protects their market share.
Okay, that makes sense strategically. But hold on. Is this economic boost, this oil price hike, really something that's going to last? Are analysts convinced?
Not universally, no. And that's an important counterpoint. Analysts at PSB Bank, for instance, they reckon the conflict is unlikely to lead to a serious disruption. They don't see things like the Strait of Hormuz closing down, so they think the price spike is probably temporary. They see Brent going back down to maybe the 60-65 range.
So a short-term bump, not a long-term solution for Russia's budget.
Possibly. And Kirill Rodionov adds that there's actually quite a lot of substantial excess oil production capacity in the Middle East. Over 4 million barrels a day, he says.
More than Iran produces.
Yeah. Significantly more. So that capacity could buffer the market if Iranian supply drops. The takeaway is, while Russia might get a temporary boost, counting on a massive long-term windfall from this is probably, risky.
Right. The market could adjust. So maybe the economic win is temporary, but what about the diplomatic side? Beyond the money, is this conflict opening doors for Russia politically?
It absolutely seems to be. This could be a major geopolitical opportunity for them. CNN's analysis put it quite starkly, saying the conflict is playing very nicely into the Kremlin's hands.
How so?
By creating diplomatic opportunities for a Kremlin that has faced years of international isolation. Russia wants back in the game as a major player. And this crisis gives them a platform, maybe even allows them to position themselves as an indispensable U.S. partner in the region, ironically enough.
Trying to become essential again.
Exactly. Hananata suggested they'll try to get involved via the UN Security Council, the IAEA, places where they still have a seat at the table. It's about re-legitimizing their global role, even while they're isolated over Ukraine.
Leveraging one crisis to ease pressure from another.
It looks that way. It's quite the strategic play.
And wasn't there that call between Putin and President Trump, where Putin apparently brought up their past cooperation on the Iran nuclear deal?
Yes, exactly. Reportedly reminding Trump of that past alliance, sort of signaling, hey, we can be useful allies again on this. And apparently, Trump was open to considering Putin as a mediator.
That's quite a shift, potentially.
It really is. It potentially creates this area of maybe not agreement, but at least interaction between Moscow and Washington that isn't about Ukraine. And for the Kremlin, that's a huge win. It changes the narrative.
Okay, so Russia is navigating this complex situation, potentially gaining economically, definitely looking for diplomatic openings. But what does this all mean for Ukraine? Because it feels like while Russia finds opportunities, Ukraine might be paying a price.
That's a crucial question, and President Zelenskyy has been very direct about the impact. He warned that the oil price surge we talked about, that directly helps Russia.
More money for their war effort.
Precisely. He said it will benefit Russia and bolster its military capabilities because of the greater income from oil exports. Russia is essentially funding its war in Ukraine partly through the fallout of this other conflict.
And he also raised concerns about aid being diverted, didn't he? Specific examples.
He did. He mentioned 20,000 Interceptor missiles originally meant for Ukraine that got redirected to Israel. He called that a blow.
Wow, 20,000's a lot.
It is. And then there was the Barak 8 air defense system. Netanyahu had apparently promised it to Ukraine. It went to the U.S. for repairs and just never arrived in Kyiv.
So real, tangible impacts on their defense capabilities.
Absolutely. And Zelenskyy also noted that the momentum behind the international coalition supporting Ukraine, that group of 31 countries, seems to have slowed.
Yeah.
He linked it to U.S. ambivalence over providing a backstop. And he made this really pointed comment saying, Europe has not yet decided for itself that it will be with Ukraine completely if America is not there.
That sounds like a real worry about wavering support, a feeling of isolation.
It certainly suggests growing anxiety in Kyiv about their long-term backing.
And wasn't there also a pretty significant statement from Zelenskyy linking potential territorial compromises to getting some kind of foreign troop presence, a reassurance force?
Yes, that was a major statement. He basically tied Ukraine's willingness to consider compromises, specifically mentioning the difficulty of retaking all territory back to the 1991 borders, to the condition of having foreign troops on the ground.
That signals a huge shift, maybe desperation, a recognition of the current military reality.
It's definitely a sign of how difficult the situation has become. And connecting this back to the Middle East, this escalating crisis there has just suddenly diverted global attention.
Away from Ukraine.
Exactly. The world's focus shifts firmly onto the Kremlin's role as a potential peacemaker in the Middle East, as the analysis put it, and away from its part in the war it is continuing to wage closer to home.
So Russia gets a strategic win, even indirectly, just by the world looking elsewhere.
It gives them breathing room, reduces the international pressure focused solely on Ukraine.
Okay, so let's try to quickly pull this together. Russia's in this incredibly tricky spot.
Yeah.
They're managing this strategic but pointedly non-military partnership with Iran, yet somehow keeping relations with Israel pretty stable.
Right, that balancing act.
They're poised to benefit economically from oil price shifts, even if that might just be temporary. And they're definitely grabbing these diplomatic chances to get back on the world stage.
While at the same time, the conflict is hitting Ukraine hard, diverting attention, diverting aid, maybe even shifting the calculus on the ground there.
It really shows how these crises are all tangled up, doesn't it? One conflict flares up, and it creates these unexpected winners and losers elsewhere.
Absolutely. It can reshape alliances, change priorities in ways you wouldn't predict.
So, thinking about all this, what does it mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this really complex global picture? Maybe consider this. How does Russia's ability to navigate these contradictions, partner one minute, mediator the next, isolated but maybe becoming indispensable again, how might that change the way countries deal with each other in future crises? Does it rewrite the rules of alliances? What stands out to you as the biggest surprise or the most significant ripple effect from Russia's role in all this?